Israel, Taub, is there for us this morning. Mr. Ambassador, Israel's Defence Force saying rockets still being fired from Gaza. In Gaza, at least 9 Palestinians reported to have been killed following a series of your airstrikes. This is a really worrying situation for so many people, obviously including yourselves. Are you concerned about the repercussions of what Israel did yesterday?
We are concerned. As you say, it's a very troubling situation. But the troubling situation didn't just begin now. We've had a troubling situation in relation to Gaza for quite some time. You know, we've had since the beginning of the year over 800 rockets and missiles fired from Gaza onto towns and villages inside Israel. This past week we saw a steep escalation. We saw, over 120 rockets and missiles fired. And what that means in practice is that over 1 million Israelis, that's 1/7 of the population of Israel, has to live within seconds of bomb shelters. Kids can't go to schools. And we're just hearing reports this morning of Israelis who have been killed by long-range missiles fired by Hamas. That is a situation which no country could allow to continue.
Yeah, but the increasing fallout in the region, I mean, you hear Egypt saying that they talk about in terms of assassinations and airstrikes and the killing of civilians. I suppose the basic question is, can the peace accord with Egypt survive this?
You know, the peace accord with Egypt and our relationship with Egypt is tremendously important to us. But the lives of our civilians are also important to us. And when we say that, the fact is people talk about assassination, but the fact is al-Jabari, was attacked not because he was a political leader, but because he was a leading terrorist who stood behind attacks against innocent Israelis, simply as acts of brutal terrorism. And I don't think any country would do anything differently other than do what it was necessary to try and protect its civilians.
So how, Mr. Ambassador, would things change with al-Jabari out of the way?
Well, every terrorist organization needs a leadership. It also needs armaments. The fact is we know that, unfortunately, Gaza has been filled up, stockpiled with heavy-duty weaponry, longer-range missiles that are smuggled in from Sudan, from Libya, from Iran. And the fact is, in the first round of Israeli sorties, a large majority of those long-range missiles have been put out of action. And you have to regard that taking away the terrorist leadership and taking those long-range missiles out of the hands of a terrorist organization has to be a step in the right direction.
Just on screen now we have this Twitter account picture of al-Jabari eliminated. Do you think it was appropriate for the IDF Twitter account to publish posters boasting about an assassination? Do you not think that's very inflammatory?
I don't know if it's inflammatory. We're talking about a complicated psychological warfare against Hamas. I think it's worth remembering that, unfortunately, on the other side of the divide, what we have a glorification of terrorists. We have, unfortunately, in the Palestinian areas, children's football teams that are named after terrorists. We have books, school books, that are actually glorifying acts of suicide, terrorism, and so on. And sometimes, in order to try and counter that glorification, you have to actually show that these people are what they really are: brutal people who are actually murdering civilians on the one hand and hiding behind civilians on the other hand. And they're not moving us closer to peace, they're moving us further away.
Well, the accusation, will come back at you that you're murdering civilians as well with drone strikes. Hamas offered a ceasefire 2 days ago during talks, and those talks brokered by Egypt. A lot of people will be wanting to know, why did Israel refuse those talks?
If we have a look at the pattern over the last several years, the fact is, if we go back even 7 years ago, Israel pulled out of every inch of Gaza, removed every Israeli. There are 9,000 Israelis, along with their schools and their kindergartens, in order to try and live in peace next to Gaza. We left behind our greenhouses and agricultural facilities to allow the Palestinians to have an economy to take root. What happened instead was that Hamas took over and started firing missiles. Since then, there has been a continuous pattern, not only of the missiles being fired, but the range getting longer, and the intervals between those salvos of missiles getting shorter and shorter, until this past week, irrespective of any talk of ceasefires that never came to fruition, it really became unbearable. Last Saturday night we had an anti-tank missile fired by Hamas, injuring 4 Israelis. We had an underground explosive under the border blown up. No country would refuse to respond in those situations.
Yeah.
But the dilemma that we face here, Ayman, is the fact that, Hamas is really committing a double war crime here. They're firing on our civilians, and they're doing it while they're hiding behind their own civilians, which means that we have a very complex task. We have to protect our civilians and try and do that in the way that protects Palestinians as far as possible.
And you make a very good point. If this was happening to a lot of your critics, what would they do? But you know as well as I know that you guys are often painted as the bad guys in all of this. And there are those who would say, very cynically, isn't this all about, or could this be all about winning votes ahead of the elections in January? What would you say to that? How would you respond to that?
I would say absolutely not. First of all, as we've said, the timing here was dictated not by us, it was dictated by the Hamas. They're the ones that chose to escalate, they're the ones that chose to try and fire anti-tank missiles, and there's the ones that are actually continuing this escalation. And I think you have to realize that we realize we're on the front line here. We're on the front line because it's our civilians who are under attack. It's our kids who are basically defending us, who are in our armed forces. So we have no interest in pursuing an escalation. If there's an option of actually calming things down and living quietly side by side and ensuring peace and security for the citizens of southern Israel, we'll be the first to take it.
Well, we hope that transpires. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ayman.
Thank you very much indeed. That is the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Daniel Taub. And we will be speaking to the Palestinian roving ambassador, that's Dr. Manuel Hassassin, 11:30 here on